right, why don't we kick it off? So again, welcome everybody. Happy Friday. It's definitely a gorgeous day outside. So really appreciate you taking the time to invest in this session instead of going outside and enjoying the beautiful weather. For the next hour or so, we're going to learn about increasing farmland conservation, access, and viability. And we're going to be asking you to participate in a poll in the beginning here, and then also to learn more about you and to ask you to provide some feedback at the end. We've got some questions, really looking for your insight and your feedback. So you'll see the poll up there. Certainly just feel free to go ahead and click on that. Choose as many as you can. Don't feel that you have to select just one. And as you go through that poll and fill that out, you'll submit it after you click it, and it should prompt off your screen once you submit your reply. So a couple other things that we're going to share with you is some resources and ways that you can participate. And really, we hope that you come away from this session with an understanding of the integrated models that are in action right now in New Hampshire to support farmland, conservation, stewardship, access, and viability. And also an awareness of resources and programs that currently exist in New Hampshire. We also want you to understand the unmet needs that are in farming and conservation communities, and an understanding of funding needs for such programs. So we've got the poll results up on the screen. That's great. Where 80% of us are eaters. That's awesome. And it looks like we've got really, strong community membership and supporter of land trusts, ag service providers, farmers. That's great. We've got a really good, diverse group of folks. So thank you for taking that poll with us. So I want to just get started with some introductions of who you're going to be hearing from over the next 50 or 55 minutes or so. So let me introduce myself first. I am Charlene Andersen. I am the farm food lender at the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund. In this role, I support entrepreneurs across the food system, from soil and water to plate and recovery. And we do this by providing financing and customized technical assistance to folks. My interest in farm and the food system initiatives was really born from my experience growing up on my family farm in Massachusetts. I'm also really proud to say that I am on the leadership team of the New Hampshire Food Alliance team. Outside of work, you can find me doing my home DIY projects, hiking and kayaking and bat watching in my backyard. Next up, the first speaker actually that you're going to hear from is Jeremy Luigi. And he is the Conservation Program Manager and Farmland Coordinator of Southeast Land Trust. In addition to managing conservation easement and land acquisitions, Jeremy works with local farmers to increase access and affordability of farmland across Selt's service area. He grew up on Hutkins Farm in New Hampton, which is a small dairy that sells a variety of products such as raw milk, yogurts, and cheese. After Jeremy, you'll hear from Amanda Littleton, and Amanda is the District Manager of Cheshire County Conservation District. And her appreciation for land blossomed as a child as she spent her free time exploring in the woods behind her home in the shores of Rhode Island. She currently serves on several projects and boards in the Monadnock region that are involved in locally produced food, community, sustainability, and healthy soils. She has great interest in supporting the region's working landscape for the value that it contributes to the local economy and good stewardship practices. When not working on what she enjoys, she can be found fixing up her old family's home, hiking, or playing in the waters of the Monadnock region. And our third speaker is Ian McSweeney. And Ian is the Organizational Director of Agrarian Trust. Ian's career and his life work has been focused on the human connection to soil and food. Ian's deeply committed in bringing about innovation to evolve farmland conservation to holistically address equitable and affordable ownership and tenure arrangements, farm viability, conservation, community resilience, to ensure that production that benefits the soil, the human, and the community health. Ian and his family own a small farm with a conservation easement in place, of course, and manages the certified tree farm. And he also leases farmland to a vegetable grower. And I have to say, I've worked with all three of these folks. They are rock stars in my book, and I think you'll really enjoy hearing from them. So why don't we kick it off with Jeremy and go forward.
Thanks, Charlene. Yeah, I was looking at the participant list, a lot of friends and fellow practitioners out there. So really appreciate everyone coming today. Go to the next slide here. So, you know, thinking about land conservation and food security, and, you know, there are some obvious connections, but also, you know, I think it's worth pointing out that we've lost a lot of farmland in the 20th century, about 90% of what we had in the 1920s. So, you know, everyone wants to have a secure local food supply. And one of the goals that we've been talking a lot about, we call it the New England Food Vision. That's New England being able to produce 50% of their food by the year 2060. It's a lofty goal, but it's certainly something that as land trusts, we need to think about how we're going to protect the land that can supply that much food. You can go to the next slide. So for land trusts, you know, there are a lot of reasons why we protect farmland. You know, you may think of it as a busy place, a lot of production going on, but it also brings the community a lot of scenic views, you know, that rural character that everyone enjoys about New Hampshire. Wildlife, a lot of wildlife species depend on the open fields that farms bring. If we didn't have farmers on the land, we would just be covered in forest here in New Hampshire. So a lot of wildlife appreciate those fields. And water supply protection, you know, the open land and open space provides a lot of acreage for water to filter before it gets into our waterways and our reservoirs. So it's also really important from a water supply perspective. And obviously just the jobs and economic activity that farms bring. I think it's, you know, it's very clear that when a farm gets developed, sure, we get housing, but, you know, what else is lost, you know, when we develop that farm. We'll go to the next slide. So this is just an example in the town of Londonderry. They actually did some research on what would the difference be between leaving a farm as it is or building quite a large subdivision. It was actually 290 house lot subdivision. And what they came up with was that after all those houses paid their taxes in a given year, the town would still owe or have to cover over $640,000 to cover things like the education of the kids in those houses, the police, fire, all the community and services that are brought to those houses. Instead, if they had left it a farm, the farm would be bringing in about $18,000 a year in its own taxes, which would be above and beyond what's needed from the community. So we can go to the next slide. So the American Farmland Trust has been doing really great work, kind of looking at how much farmland we're actually losing. You know, sometimes it's hard to tell because it's, you know, it's a piecemeal loss. It's just one farm here and there. But in New Hampshire, from the years 2001 to 2016, we lost over 11,000 acres of farmland. A lot of that is prime farmland because that's also the most productive and easily developed land in the state. You know, prime farmland is not rocky, it's flat, it's fertile. So it's, you know, prime target for development. So that loss of 11,000 plus acres, we're losing over $5 million a year from those farms in terms of what they produce. And, you know, just one other thing to point out, and this is something that all of the practitioners in this world are going to have to deal with over the next, say, 30 years. most of our farmers are over the age of 65, and you know, the farmers that are coming up to replace them, there aren't nearly enough to replace them. So there's going to be a lot of land transition over the next 30 years, and we're going to have to really think about ways to stabilize that land while those transitions are happening. Next slide. So where can you find support if you're interested in doing farmland protection work? I think the first stop would be your local land trust. Not everyone has that. So there are lots of other organizations, conservation districts, Land for Good is a really great resource. Ag commissions, conservation commissions, depending on what town you live in, a conservation commission may or may not be already doing some good farmland protection work. Cooperative Extension is a great resource. Obviously, the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture and the Farm Bureau. There's funding can be had from all different areas. You know, at the federal level, the Natural Resources Conservation Service is a great place to go. They provide up to 50% of the cost of conserving a farm. At the state level, we have LCHIP, of course, and Moose Plate that can be good resources. Oftentimes, conservation commissions can be tapping into the land use change tax or other conservation funding that they have within their own town. I've worked on projects before where we brought a request to town meeting, and you know, depending on how supportive people are of local farms in your community, that's a great resource. And also private fundraising, either working with foundations or just doing some kind of a GoFundMe project, that can work as well. Next slide. So just some thoughts about when you're maybe going out there and thinking about how to protect farmland. You know, farmland's a little bit different than just protecting a block of forest or some other more natural land. You know, it really requires that both the farmer and the land trust or whoever's conserving that land have common goals and expectations. This is not protect the land and, you know, pull back and hands off. Farms are busy places. They're, you know, it's a commercial operation, and you know, there's going to be machinery here and there, and it's just very different from protecting, say, a town forest. So it's important that the land trust or whoever's conserving that land sort of set their expectations to the fact that it's going to be a farm. Next slide. Yeah, this is just another saying the same thing twice, but once land is protected, a land trust will be doing monitoring visits every year, and we call that stewardship on the land trust side. So you just need to make sure that the land trust has experience working with farms, or that they understand that this isn't going to be like stewarding just a natural property. Next slide. So, you know, this is a great slide. This was on Bodwell Farm in Kensington, New Hampshire. And the reason I love it so much is as soon as these kids saw the cows from the school bus, they were like climbing over one another to get out and see them. It was really cool. And these kids were from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And believe it or not, some of them came up to me and said, I've never seen a cow in real life before. And that may be hard to believe for some of you in more rural areas of New Hampshire, but there are kids in New Hampshire that have grown up in New Hampshire that had not seen a cow in real life. So just keep that in mind and think of ways that you can connect your community with the local farms. Hold on, sorry. So another thing to think about, you know, it's on the conservation side, but it's also on the land access side. But there are a lot of farmers, particularly in the area that I work down on the seacoast, that struggle to access farmland for themselves. Maybe they work on a farm for 5 or 10 years and want to start their own farm. It's tough to find farmland, certainly affordable farmland, and it can even be tough to lease land. So things to keep in mind. You know, a farmer needs to be secure in that lease. Having a 1-year lease is not secure for a farmer. It doesn't allow them to really invest in the soils and invest in any infrastructure on the property. And it's really difficult to be profitable when you're not doing that. So if you have, say, a piece of land that you could lease to a farmer, or your town, or perhaps even a land trust owns a property that could be leased, try to keep those things in mind. And as I'll talk about in a second here, sometimes farm leases can open the door to actual purchases. And that's the best case scenario. Next slide. So just a little bit about, how the horizon is changing a little bit for land trusts. We've gotten pretty good at protecting land, farmland specifically, but we're beginning to realize that it's not enough just to protect farmland and walk away. We really need to be engaging with those farms and thinking about farm viability, their productivity, making sure they're continuing to produce food, and the affordability of that land. Like I said, on the seacoast and some other pockets in New Hampshire, it's really, really hard for young farmers to find land that they can afford to purchase. And then, so that's something that the Southeast Land Trust is working on. We've done a few projects now, or some of them are in the hopper, where we're using what's called an option to purchase at agricultural value. And what it does is it essentially puts a requirement on the conservation easement that when that farmer is done farming the land and they want to sell it, they need to sell to another farmer, and it's sold at agricultural value. And the difference between a conserved property, say a 30-acre property that's conserved, that's sold on the open market today on the seacoast, and a property that's sold at agricultural value, I mean, we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars in difference. So those are just some things we're thinking about. We can go to the next slide. So we're going to show a video here, and I just want to set it up a little bit because they reference some things that not everyone may be familiar with. So this is Jimmy Tudor and Kristen Klenow, and they live in Farmington. They've been running Clyde Farm for about 5 years, and they were looking long and far away to find farmland to purchase. And so they were originally working at a farm called New Roots Farm, and so they're going to reference that. And whenever they reference something to the south, it just means closer to the seacoast and more expensive. So I'm going to let the video speak for itself.
Have a tendency to fly out there.
So we started at New Roots, which that was a really good way to start, to get to see. That was our first farm experience in New England. I've been farming for a long time, but never in this climate. So I learned a lot in those first 2 years. And that's when Jimmy decided he wanted to start raising animals. So he got to do it under the name of New Roots. And use all of her clientele, and she had raised meat in the past, so she had good tips for him, and that's how he really learned what it took and what he needed to do to make that work. And I worked full-time for her as a vegetable farmer.
So I guess the possibility of owning land rather than leasing land opens up some things that you can really only do on land that you own, like putting in the time to like plant an orchard or putting in grapevines. We're interested in fermentation. We make our own cider and wine, and we have experience in the fermentation industry. So yeah, that's something that we could never, you would never invest in building a winery on leased land, or you'd never invest in planting an orchard or a vineyard on leased land, since it's like a perennial production sort of thing.
I mean, we really found a good niche here. There definitely seems to be a need for local organic produce, and there's not a lot already here where we were. There were a lot of other small organic farms, and the clientele is there, but there's more to compete with, and we just couldn't afford to buy anything farther south.
I think it's hard enough to buy a new place, but then also have to be in like a super competitive market.
Yeah.
You don't really have any wiggle room. The Farm Future Fund has been really helpful as we transition onto this property, because they've just given us resources to like seek legal guidance. They're looking at contracts and the easement language, and making sure that we're going to be in a position legally in terms of how the easement and the sale is going to happen, that we can have like a future farming here that's not going to have any like unexpected kind of consequences of the easement or the sale contract, how it's been written. And in addition to that, they're helping us do some enterprise analysis, looking at long-term profitability. They're also just, besides the financial assistance they're giving us, they're just being a great resource for connecting us to like NRCS grants or something that we originally maybe asked them about if they could help with, and they're able to just say, well, actually there's an NRCS grant for that, and we're glad to help you, connect you with the necessary resources to obtain those grants.
And living where we were growing was a really high priority for us. So yeah, now that we are going to own this place, we've planted a bunch of perennials already, like apples and berries and tons of flowers that I never would have been able to grow.
People ask us, like, how did you find this place? Like, how, this seems like such a match made in heaven. Like, how did you, like they're asking us, like, how did you do it? And we're like, well, we really just reached out to Celt, like a lot of farmers do, and kind of daydreamed out loud to them about what we would be looking for in ideal farm property. And they let us know when there was something that kind of fit those parameters. So, I mean, working with Celt has been amazing. There's no way that we could be purchasing property, conserved or not, really, without Celt, because they have provided like the scaffolding to the deal. Whereas if this was just on the open market, even if it was conserved land, it all would just be happening so fast, and there might be a non-farmer buyer interested in purchasing the property. But with Celt kind of being the matchmaker and the deal maker, it's kind of allowed it to happen at farmer speed rather than having to compete on the open market for property.
So that was just an example of some farmers that were, leasing land and really wanted to make a purchase. And next up, we're going to have Amanda Littleton. They used a fund that was created about 1.5 years ago called the New Hampshire Farm Future Fund, and Amanda's going to talk a little bit about that.
Great, thanks, Jeremy. It's so nice to see that Clyde video and see sort of how this work is in action on the ground. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the New Hampshire Farm Future Fund, which is a program that has a mission to provide funding for farm viability planning in concert with the conservation of important agricultural soils in New Hampshire. And I love how Jeremy alluded to in his presentation, like going beyond conservation, because conservation of the land is absolutely key for the success of these farm businesses into the future and for future generations as well. But we have to go above and beyond that and ensure that the land that we're protecting stays in active agriculture. We want to keep the working lands working, and we sort of see this as a singular opportunity to leverage when you're putting the conservation easement on the property to really invest in the farm business to ensure its success in the future. So our goal of this program, the New Hampshire Farm Future Fund, is farmland that's conserved, productive, and available for future generations. And we're really trying to take an integrated approach to working lands. And you may be wondering sort of how this got started. Well, even though it's a relatively new program, we started it in 2020. Partners have been working on this for years, these concepts. So a few years back, the Ammonoosuc Conservation Trust received some USDA funding to partner with organizations like the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund and others to really look at how do we strengthen working lands in New Hampshire and sort of these three sectors. So you got your agricultural production, right? That's key. That's what the farms are doing, the resources they need on the ground and the assistance there for production. And then you've got the business viability side, right? How are we ensuring that they, are investing in the success of their business? And then the third piece, the third green here, is the conservation. So planning for conservation, looking at easement options for that farm, so we can ensure we don't lose any more of that good farmland that, unfortunately, as Jeremy pointed out, we've lost way too much of already in this state. So the Ammonoosuc Conservation Trust and partners kind of looked at these three different areas and said, all right, at this intersection, this blue place in the middle, that's where a lot of innovation can be happening, because this is where, if we're working on the planning with all of these three components together, it's going to benefit the farmer and it's going to benefit future generations of farms to ensure that we have this available. All right, next. All right, so well, there's some lessons learned here when there was this pilot with 3 Grafton County farms that Ammonoosuc Conservation Trust did. So I'm just going to share 4 of those lessons. And first one is that these projects take a long time. Any of you practitioners that are here know that. They take years in the making to get everything lined up, whether it's the easement process or the business side of things and the succession, never mind when you put it all together. So the funding that's provided to do this work, it needs to match those timelines. That was a key takeaway. The other component was that not all land trusts have the capacity to be doing a lot of development work with farms in advance of the easement. So sort of that pre-easement work, there needs to be dollars available. There was a real funding gap identified for that. Outside of those 2 funding components, we realized that it's essential for the farmers to be committed. Essential for them to be committed to this process and want to work on their business and take these next steps, as well as put the easement on their property. And then the last learning piece for this pilot program was that the succession planning and transfer planning piece was missing. So business planning is key, but what if you're later in your life cycle as a farmer and you're starting to eye retirement? And so how do we get that planning involved to keep that land in production for the next generation? So back in 2018, the New Hampshire Food Alliance created this land resources action team that many of us were involved on. And we realized that a major goal here for the state was we need to get more dollars for land conservation and land access in New Hampshire. Many states have statewide pools. We have some of those, but they're very limited in New Hampshire. And so we said, all right, let's look to this pilot that was done up with those Grafton County farms. Let's make sure we're addressing those lessons learned from the pilot and bring some philanthropic dollars to the state and federal resources that we have available, because we want to ensure this long-term viability of the working lands in the state. And so we did some ground truthing with ideas with the Land Trust Coalition, as well as some of the member land trusts. We wanted to make sure this was meeting needs in the community that weren't already being met, sort of filling a niche. And then we identified the New Hampshire Association of Conservation Districts and their member districts as a good administrator for this program, because they sort of hold the yes conservation and yes ag together. So it was a great mission fit for it to move forward. All right, next, please. All right, so here we are. And I just wanted to put this slide up because for me, it sort of tells a story of like the farmer is at the center of this story, right? It's all about sort of doing this holistic programming around the needs of the farmer. We want to sort of have these wraparound services from all the different service providers to meet the unique needs of any given farm. And so we worked with the land trust to find a farm that they're interested in working with on conservation, or the other way around, the farmer to find the land trust as well. And they're the ones who put an application to this program, and they work together on it. And all this work is made possible, I should be remiss if I didn't say it, through the You Have Our Trust Fund. They are the key funders and supporters of this work and allowed for it to launch in New Hampshire for the past couple years. But we've also had additional support from the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and other donors. So they are the ones that make these dollars available when the applicant, the land trust, and the farmer decide to work together. And then they work with the two main partners that are working on the ground with this program. It's the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, who's doing a lot of the business viability work, as well as Land for Good, who's really focused on that succession, farm transfer planning, looking at estate planning, retirement planning. And so those are the two main partners that say, all right, farms, what do you need? How do we make sure we get a plan crafted, a scope of work that we can work on and get it for you together? All right. And so that's sort of how the program works in a nutshell. Trying to go through this kind of fast, so I apologize if I'm skipping over anything, but I'd like to just share sort of like what's been happening here for the past 2 grant cycles. And so really, we're excited. It's only been 2 years, but we're excited to share that in these 2 grant cycles, we're working now with 10 farms in the state of New Hampshire, and that they're in over 7 different counties. And it's with 8 different land trusts. So this, it's been really great to work with the land trust staff on this program because they're so good at what they do to conserve the land. And it's been really, I think, a great sort of give and take about learning about sort of the business planning side and the land transfer planning side, sort of bringing us all up to speed on these different subject areas. So of these 10 farms, we're looking at the conservation of 991 acres of land through those 10 farms. And that's a lot of farmland in New Hampshire, good farmland. Most of it's prime or state and local importance, so we're excited about that. But really what's unique about these dollars is the fact that they're small. So we've only put $190,000 invested into this, where in comparison, that's leveraging 3 million, just under 3 million to get that 991 acres in conservation. So these are real small dollars when it comes to easements, but they're very unique in that there's not many other pots of money right now that are doing those wraparound services for farms, meeting the farmers where they're at. And so I'll just kind of close here by sharing what are the farms doing with these dollars? Well, if they're a younger farm family, like you saw in some of those earlier pictures that are participating, they're looking at their markets. They're saying, how do we expand our customer base? How do we shift sales models? Are we doing enterprise analysis to see sort of how we can take this to the next level for the next couple decades that they plan to be running their business? But then on the other end, we've got a lot of, if the farms are aging, or the farmers rather are aging, then there's a lot of estate planning, talk about succession planning and bringing it to that next generation. And so I'll leave it at that with just the thoughts of kind of to start thinking about with everybody is that we would love for you to share this program with other farms that you might know who could benefit, because it's new and we're not sure everybody's aware that this is available. So we just look for your assistance in that. And of course, we're hoping to make this an annual grant round. So this is something that could be complimentary dollars available to any of the farms being conserved in the state. So that's our goal. And we do have limited funding, but we always are looking for additional ideas for grants and donations. So anybody in the audience, we hope to open it up for conversation with that after this. So with that, I'm going to stop there and I'm going to turn it over to Ian to share about the Agrarian Trust and Agrarian Commons. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Amanda. And thank you, Jeremy and Charlene and everyone who's in attendance to learn more and engage. I will move fairly quickly through these slides. Charlene, Jeremy, and Amanda did a great job of kind of framing the New Hampshire reality I'm going to share a little bit on the national reality for agriculture, farmland conservation, and a little bit about my work. And just to expand a little bit on the introduction, thank you, Charlene, is that, so I'm the organizational director of Agrarian Trust. Agrarian Trust is a national 501c3 land trust that works on raising the issue around the ownership, access, and tenure to farmland and the transition that's going on within those presently, supporting stakeholders and developing stakeholder networks, and then creating what we call an agrarian commons model, but creating a community-centered common structure to hold farms and convey lease tenure framed in equity and justice and farm viability work. Next slide, please. So, and prior to that, I had a career running the Russell Foundation, a private foundation, and before that was in social work. And as Charlene mentioned in the opening, my work is really centered around connecting people with land, connecting people with each other, and really feel that people are disconnected from each other and disconnected from land, and really feel that we're in a crisis. We're in a crisis in many ways in this country right now, as we're all aware. But I feel we're in a crisis of agriculture and small to mid-sized farms when we're losing 37 farms a day, when farmers have some of the highest suicide rates, when the other points brought here are a reality for farmers in this country. And I personally believe that we in New Hampshire and others in northern New England have a kind of extreme reality for this in our demographics being older than the national average, our demographics being less diverse than the national average. New growth in farmers is quite a bit more diverse than our country is. So we're at a place where we have an aging population of farmers and farmland owners. And as was mentioned, not enough farmers to take over, and really not enough farmers in sheer number of people, but also not enough farmers in the diversity that is the farming community nationally. Next slide, please. So we Agrarian Trust work around the country. As I mentioned, we in New Hampshire are very fortunate to have the number of land trusts and funding we do. It would be great to have more funding. All of our neighboring states have more funding than us dedicated to this work. They have more support organizations, but as a framing, like we in New Hampshire have more land trusts working in our state than all of southeast part of the country, where it shows up as dark red and dark green of highly productive farmland and farmland that's being lost to development and extraction. So that the number of resources we have here is significant when we look around the country. It is lacking when we look to our neighbors. Next slide, please. So, and the reality is too that our climate is collapsing in many ways, and we look at the fires that exist and threaten our food system, the pandemic that threatens and stretches and fractures our food system, and a reality that we locally here in New Hampshire produce very little of the food we need. We are food insecure at an extreme level in this state. So we are, impacted by climate collapse. We're impacted by all these kind of failures in the food system that exist and will continue to unfold. And we really need to relocalize our food system. And we have examples, we were doing that not too long ago in this state. If we walk through the forest, we look at the history of our landscape here. If we walk through a village in New Hampshire, we see how the town was laid out, and there was a priority on food production and an agricultural economy that has since been lost in many ways. But it wasn't that many generations ago that we had an intact local food system. Next slide, please. So the other crisis point to bring forward that was touched upon as well is the price of farmland. The market value of farmland is significantly high, and farm income is low, and it's on a trend that has continued for the last 3 decades of farmland values increasing, farm income decreasing. So, you know, we're in a state with older population of farmland owners. Nationally, the average farmland owner is about 64 years old. We skew a little higher than that. So the reality is many who are owning farmland now and started their farming career generations ago can speak to the struggles they had in affording land or the fortune they had in affording land. But 30 years of time have made it near impossible for next generations to now afford farmland. And as Jeremy mentioned, like, you know, conservation easements help. They only go so far in addressing that financial reality. The OPAV, option to purchase at agricultural value, is a next step forward that definitely helps, and applaud Southeast Land Trust for expanding that work in the state. And really, we also need to think beyond that as well, because there's Land for Good has done studies of OPAV use throughout New England because our neighboring states have used it for decades, and it shows that, you know, it does support farm access. It does create a price that's affordable for farming, farm businesses, but it is not equally available for all farmers, as you can imagine. You know, the highly capitalized existing farm business is going to be able to pay a higher price than the new next generation farmer coming on, as one example. So, you know, finding ways to go beyond the OPAV are also critically important. Next slide, please. So the Agrarian Trust, we're a national land trust. We feel that community decision-making, community land holding, community held equity are critically important.
Yeah,
we also
I
feel,
was also
as
kind of feeling
others have said, that
you know, what the return
can we
that they're actually
mute
offering.
someone?
A bunch of videos and emails that people may or may not
Brett,
watch.
could you
Brett?
please mute?
Oh, there we go. All right. So, we believe that, you know, as was shared in your picture, Amanda, and you brought up that the farmer is the center of this picture. So, you know, my work running foundation, others involved in Agrarian Trust, their background in land conservation, in farmland protection work, centered on the reality that we wanted to develop a model that was local in scope and was focused on and centered on the farmers. So we created an agrarian commons model. What an agrarian commons model is multiple local land holding nonprofit entities, 501c2 entities that are in essence similar to a community land trust. Ketch is a great example of a community land trust in the Concord region. Generally, community land trusts are focused on affordable housing or other built infrastructure needs, but their structure is ownership of the real estate and lease conveyance of that real estate for you know, people to build homes, to live on that land. So what we've done is use a community land trust structure as the commons model and created community land trust structures across the country, each supported by, connected to Agrarian Trust, and each independent with their own board that has majority local control, that has farmers directly on the board. And that entity then holds title to farms in the region it works, conveys 99-year lease tenure or whatever state law allows as maximum to farmers to build equity, to run farm business on the land. Next slide, please. So we've this past May, on May 1st of this past year, mid-pandemic, we launched this Agrarian Commons model. We've been developing it for a number of years, done research on what exists across the country, using a 501c2 and other alternative landholding structures within a land trust. We then had several years of committees to get input, develop founding documents and structure. And then we got to the point of launching in May of this past year. Launching meant we incorporated agrarian commons in these locations and have viable farm projects that we vetted and are pursuing forward. Next slide, please. So, and this is what the numbers look like for the launch from May 12th. So 12 agrarian commons, we have 17 farms we're working with, 2,800 acres. Next slide, please. And this is what a makeup of the board looks like. You know, the majority of the board are women, they are farmers, they're local to the region, a number of land trust professionals, majority of attorneys on the board. You know, but each board is unique to place, so their priorities and work and farms they're working with and their goals differ. But this is kind of a snapshot of generally kind of the makeup of the board. Next slide, please. So in this relationship, jumping forward, I'm just about out of time here. I know it's a lot of information, and I'm kind of going to shift gears briefly here, but just to get into a little bit of the model itself, is that so what this model does is it holds ownership permanently in this community land trust, the Agrarian Commons, which is a nonprofit entity, and then it conveys leasehold tenure to farmer to operate. Farmer could be a for-profit business, a nonprofit, a cooperative. We have a county in one case who's the leasehold interest. Farms could be production farms. They could be more subsistence farms or educational training farms. It really differs quite a bit. That's the intent of the model, that we're not prescribing the legal structure of the farm or what their market or focus is. That's their own business. We are not part of that. And yet through the model, we have certain values that all farms uphold. Some of those are around agricultural practice. We're focused on regenerative, chemical-free food production agriculture. Some of those are in stewardship practice, about building habitat, setting land aside, regenerating soil, protecting water quality. Some of those are around equity within the lease, ways that people can build financial equity, also equity and justice for people in who actually gets access, who gets the lease, what farms we're working with. And there's examples of that around the country. Another part of the model that I just want to touch on briefly now is because it's a nonprofit structure, grants, donations, and philanthropic capital can help support the farm structure, so that the Agrarian Commons is owning the land and it's managing, stewarding the land and leasing out to farmers. So it's really a nonprofit landlord in essence. And that landlord is the community and the farmer. Because it's a nonprofit entity and it's able to raise and invest that philanthropic capital, it can do things like projects we have underway, one in New Hampshire and one on Whidbey Island in Washington, where we, Agrarian Trust, with a grant funds from Patagonia, are investing in habitat pollinator projects on the ground on the farms in New Hampshire and Washington. We're also in discussions with some solar partners to bring both investment capital and philanthropic capital forward to invest in solar projects on the farms to eliminate that energy cost, which, you know, local to us, the cost of land is extremely high in New Hampshire, but our property taxes and our energy costs are some of the highest in the nation right here. So, you know, those three costs in a farm's budget are significant. And so thinking about farm viability, the land is critically important, but then what other costs are extremely burdensome? And I would argue here, property taxes and energy costs are extremely burdensome and are, you know, some of the highest in the country. So finding ways to help farmers with that, who also have a very short growing season, you know, a higher energy cost is in Hawaii, but their growing season is quite different, right? So we have a short growing season to generate income and extremely high costs for holding that property. But so next slide, please. So there's many other ways that this model also builds equity and justice. I'll just breeze through these quick, but there's, you know, there's the ability for farmer to invest in infrastructure and capital, and they own that capital. There's the ability for solar or other ecosystem projects or buildings infrastructure to be carried by the nonprofit structure. I'd point out my own feeling that the dairy industry in New England is dying, and it likely may not be here outside of a few examples of local dairy farms. The reality is the costs of land are high, the costs of production are high, costs of infrastructure are high, and there's not enough revenue to support those. Maybe we should think about nonprofits shouldering the cost of that infrastructure for a dairy farm if we want to allow dairy to survive in New England. You know, the economics just don't work for dairy farms. So one way to look at it would be, can a nonprofit and philanthropic capital help? Next slide, please. Many other aspects to the model, but you know, it takes land off the market. It prohibits the ability to put the land at risk with significant debt. It allows a transition from one generation to the next without a risk of sale. It allows kind of access by the community. Next slide, please. And we're creating these across the country. As I said, we value, you know, the things we do. I'll skip over this for now. Next slide. And thank you. You know, that's happy to talk more. Please follow up, email, phone, or please subscribe to our newsletter to learn more. Thank you. And I'll end there.
Thanks so much, Ian. So I'm just going to toss this over to Charlene for a couple minutes to go over sort of the calls to actions, the next step, but then we can stay on for a few minutes for those who are interested for Q&A after that.
Yeah, thanks, Amanda, and thank you, Jeremy and Ian. So, you know, the question always comes up, well, how can I help, right? What can I do? And there's really a variety of ways that you can be philanthropic and keep these innovative models supported and growing. And we're gonna put this into the chat, and also you'll get copies of these slides in follow-up emails after the statewide gathering. But you know, basically there is a lot of ways that you can contribute. And you know, if you're interested and you really want to start your own crowdfunding, I'd reach out to local crowd Monadnock. They can help set you up. There's the local crowd is a resource for folks for training and software to develop their own crowdfunding mechanism to support farm and food businesses in New Hampshire. Next slide. I'm not going to touch much on this because Jeremy shared a lot of it in his slide. As far as, you know, if you're a landowner, there's multiple resources out in the state for you to reach out to, everyone from the Land Trust Coalition to USDA Rural Development. So there's a lot of resources here in the state of New Hampshire. And Amanda, I'll turn it back to you.
Great, thanks, Charlene. So yeah, we'll make that available, but we just want to open it up right now. It's a relatively small group. So for question and answer, what do you guys think? Anybody have any questions? Feel free to unmute or put it in the chat and I can read it from there. Any questions for Ian and Jeremy on the excellent work that's happening? As we wait for folks, I mean, Jeremy, I'd love to just start out with you. You know, what if there is a farmer out there that's interested in starting this conservation process, or a farmland owner perhaps that isn't a farmer themselves? How do they get started?
Yeah, I think, you know, the best piece of advice I would give them is to look and see if you have a local land trust in your area. Land trusts are generally trained at this, and most land trusts in New Hampshire are interested in protecting farmland. So if you don't have a land trust in your area, you can try your local conservation commission. That'll be at the town level. or you can also reach out to your conservation districts. And if they aren't holding easements, they may be able to point you in the right direction. I'll also just mention there's a book called Conserving Your Land, which you can find on the New Hampshire Land Trust Coalition's website. And it's a really nice, pretty short book about obviously how to conserve your land, a great resource to have.
Thanks, Jeremy. So I do see a question just came through in the chat directed to you, Ian, and it's what are the possibilities for scaling the commons approach on a larger scale with the same funding model, others?
Yeah, so our thought is that, yeah, this model needs to be scaled to a large impact. You know, that's why, so we're working in 10 states, launched in May with 12 agrarian commons. Our belief is that change happens from the community on up. So our goal is really to grow outwardly and not upwardly. We've set structure within the commons, and each commons can grow to hold between 4 and 12 farm or food systems properties. So really keeping individual commons at a human scale and a community scale, but then replicating, creating new commons over time, and thinking that, you know, growth to create a commons in every state would be our goal. And there's 3 decades now of a similar community-centered farm ownership movement that's been going on in Europe now, started in France. And with one organization, there's now over 20 organizations working in different countries in Europe, holding that one entity in France now has over 20 community-centered farm owning common structures, and the other entities have their own number of, you know, community commons entities, and then farms held within all of them are within the thousands. So really, you know, we can and need to grow this structure. The reality is there's no public money for fee ownership of farmland. Public funds go towards conservation easement protection on the federal level. State level, they might go towards easement or other agricultural work. There's been bills put forward in California and Vermont to try to create state funding to support fee acquisition by land trusts. Neither one passed yet. There was Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal. The 25 points he highlighted, number 25 was community farmland ownership. There's been several other discussions during the pandemic of the need for community land trusts to return equity to communities and bring security to that equity. But ultimately, you know, to scale this, it would take capital, and it would take a public funding source. What we're doing is private capital raises for each one of the farms, and it's, you know, it's possible, but it's time consuming. Projects are time consuming already. It can only scale so far. You know, we are also, you know, understanding that the land trust movement by and large created a culture of donation, people donating land, people donating easements, that's been taking place for decades now. And people see value in donating land for open space and natural resources. A very small percent of those people see value in donating farms. But I think more people culturally care about food system farms and agriculture than the culture that's willing to donate farms. So I think growing that space of the donation is important. And I think on the federal level, you know, the conservation easement program, what's now ASAP-AL, is a great program and really could be expanded, replicated, or create kind of a kind of sleeve program within to fund fee acquisition of farmland in the same way, with the same requirements and goals and eligible entities and such. So there's structures that could work towards this. There's just no dollars allocated to it yet, but it would take a minor shift to get there, I think.
Well, thank you, Ian. And not seeing any other questions in the chat right now. I know we are out of time. It is 10:20, but I just want to invite everybody to consider those questions that were posted there. What else are you interested in learning more about? And what are some of the unmet needs that you're seeing that that the conversation isn't addressing here in New Hampshire? Because we'd love to hear from you and do some follow-up by email as well. So please do put it in the chat or follow up with any of us individually. Jennifer, toss it back to you.
That was great. Thank you so much.